Dan the Artman's Book Reviews, Episode 78, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, by Ransom Riggs. This was a fun, well-written adventure. Part coming of age, part urban fantasy, part-time travel story. It was a lot more frank and honest than I was expecting from a fantasy story. It reads a lot more like a literary coming-of-age book with fantastical elements woven throughout the pages. At times, the writing was so good, beautiful, and used such great words that it didn't seem to mesh well with the way that the main character would have actually written it. The narrator often felt a lot more like the author writing the book than the main character writing the book in first person. It was well-written, beautiful prose, but sometimes it took me out of the story a little bit because I didn't think it fit the main character's voice. Other than that, I have no complaints about this story, and I thought it was awesome. It was well told. There was a lot of great mystery to it. It seemed to take forever to reveal the fantastical stuff in the book, but it was a good kind of edge-of-your-seat waiting. I really enjoyed going on this journey with the main character. I read this book by listening to the audiobook. I don't recommend you do the same, but the second and third books are by a narrator I really like, so check those out if you like the first book. The narrator for this book is talented and actually a great narrator, but he is really awful at accents. A lot of the characters have accents in this book, and he just butchers their lines. It was really painful. It didn't ruin the audiobook for me, but it made it much less enjoyable, and I wish I would have read the book with my eyes instead of listening to this version of it. That said, if I knew there wouldn't be any accents in it, I would listen to another audiobook read by this narrator, because when he wasn't trying to use an accent, he was great. The story ends in a cool place that leaves you eager to read the next book in the series. But it was still a great, complete story all its own. The world is going to become a whole lot bigger in the next book. I look forward to continuing my journey with these fun, peculiar characters. Awesome. Yeah, I remember not being sure what to expect from the story, but just from reading the premise of it, it really appealed to me. I love any kind of story where it kind of happens in our normal, real world, our modern world, and then the characters slowly discover that there is actually a whole magical world right among us in our so-called normal world. Like Chronicles of Narnia, which I guess that's a little different actually because they go through portals and wardrobes, but I just love that whole kind of urban fantasy where magic actually does exist and it's in our world, it's just really well hidden. And one thing that this book did a good job of is helping you discover this magical world with the main character. And I just love it how, like I said, there were just hints of it and it slowly unfolds and is slowly revealed. There's just something about that that's really fun because as the reader, you're going on this quest, this adventure of discovery with the main character, and I think that's a great way to tell a story like this. So I'm trying to add a little bit more after I read my review in here, just to get ready for once we hit episode 100. I'll be answering 12 discussion questions about the books I'm going to read, which are on a list of the 100 books to read before you die, and it's made up of a whole bunch of those kind of lists, all made into one list of the best 100 books to read before you die. So it's going to kind of hopefully feel like a book club, which maybe this podcast already kind of does to you. Personally, I love to go after I have finished reading a book and go and just see what other people thought about that book. So I usually just find YouTube videos of book reviewers. And I just enjoy hearing their thoughts about it, what they liked, what they didn't, and how that differs from my own feelings about the book. So I hope that this podcast does that same thing for you, but I also don't ever have spoilers in here, so that it's also a great resource for you to maybe check a book out, because the way I'm describing it makes it sound like it's a book you would also enjoy. So, that said, I just want to touch on this whole idea of writing. Some people call it purple prose. Prose is not like poetry, it's like narrative writing, telling a story, really. And purple kind of connotes that it's flowery or like very poetic or just a lot of extra big words, and it's written in a way that is maybe could be distracting or could be the reason you're reading the book. That's what I want to talk about. So, one of the reasons that even though I prefer to read modern sci-fi and fantasy adventure stories, where the pace just moves, and also I've really come to love slice of life cozy books where the stakes are low and you're just kind of getting through a change in someone's life, kind of a coming of age or changing of careers type of story. And it's just a kind of an every man or every woman character discovering how to do this new thing in their life or whatever. All that to say, some of my favorite authors are the ones who have very flowery prose, like Charles Dickens. The way that he describes characters in his novels are just amazing. There are other authors that I really like who have writing that is purposefully plain, and they're doing it on purpose to just, you could say, get their writing out of the way so that it's not a distraction and they are just telling the story. And as the reader, you're just in the story, just cruising along. One of those authors is Brandon Sanderson, who mostly writes epic fantasy books, which are super huge and long, like over 1,000 pages, over 40 hours in audio. But a lot of times, you're just floating through the story and the pages are flying by because the writing is not getting in the way by stopping to talk about just the finest details of a character's clothing or the world or the setting of the room that they're in. Whereas other authors do take the time to write in a poetic way, and as you're reading the story might be great, but also you are slowing down at times to just enjoy how beautifully crafted the words are that you're reading. So for me, the things I love are plot-driven books, story-driven, I guess you could say, where the story is moving. But like I said, I also like to read classical literature because even though admittedly sometimes the stories are really boring, there's not much going on, or all the things are in the character's head and emotions and just little social things going on, no big fight scenes or action, kind of boring stories for me, a guy who likes to read action. But I still really enjoy reading those books because in them I find some of the most beautiful, elegantly crafted writing I have ever read. And for that reason, I don't tend to find that in much modern literature. But like I said, I'm reading a lot of speculative fiction or genre fiction, which is to tell a fun story, to take you to other worlds and to help you escape, and so it's different. But surprisingly, I've never read one fantasy novel called The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Mostly it's because he hasn't finished his series, which drives me crazy. But I have been told by many people that I would love that book because it is so beautifully written. So, go to my website, dantheartman.com, and you can click on the blog post for this episode of Dan the Artman's Book Reviews, episode 78, and just leave a comment. Let me know what you think about flowery purple prose, if you hate it or if you love it. Anyways, I guess I'll end with this from the perspective of a writer, because I actually also write fiction. And early on, I thought, okay, I read a lot of classics growing up. If I can write beautiful sentences and poetic prose, then I can write great books. But that just wasn't true. What I really needed to learn was story structure so that I could tell good stories. And even then, sometimes my favorite parts of the book would be like 1 or 2 sentences here and there where I am describing something in great detail in a way that I think is beautiful and witty, but then I would get feedback from some readers that it didn't really fit in with the rest of the story, and it was kind of a distraction. So, is there a good balance one can hit where you're telling great stories and you have beautiful prose? What do you think? I've definitely read it in lots of authors before, so I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But until next time, happy reading.
This podcast is brought to you by DanDanTheArtman.com, where you can find more book reviews, entries on Dan's writing journey, and links to purchase Dan's books, like Haunted House Flipper or The Case of the Missing Snowman. Music by Dan Absalonson.